Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on relationships and processes within schools, looking at ethnicity and subcultures. In previous videos we've looked at the formation of gendered subcultures and subcultures based on social class, but in the education system there are also subcultures based on ethnic groupings as well. These are also gendered and based on class, so it's always worth remembering the intersectional nature of student experiences. But first of all, we need to define what we mean by subcultures. Well, subcultures are groups who have their own norms and values that are distinctly different from those of mainstream society. We've looked at some of the more common types of subculture: anti-school subcultures, pro-school subcultures, laddish subcultures. And now we'll look at another common form of subcultures in the education system, which is ethnic subcultures. Research into ethnic subcultures shows how members of the group use their ethnicity as a common identity and react in a number of ways to the way that the education tries to shape their identity. Shane examined subcultures that involved Asian girls in her research and the different ways in which Asian girls reacted to the pressures of school, both positively and negatively. Archer examined Pakistani and Bangladeshi Muslim boys and how they reacted to the ethnocentrism of education and how they adapted aspects of Black Caribbean and African American culture as their norms and values. While Sewell looked at the construction of black masculinities in education, arguing, and there is a synoptic link to Robert K. Merton's strain theory, that black boys reacted differently to the pressures that education placed upon them. The first ethnic subculture to examine is that of Asian girls as outlined by Shane. Shane examined the reactions of Asian students to the process of setting and streaming and how this influenced their friendship groups. Shane found 4 distinct groups of Asian girls in her research: the gang girls, who adopted an anti-school subculture as a form of resistance against what they perceived as being the racist attitudes of white schooling; the survivors, who mostly conformed; the rebels, who acted against their home and community norms and values, pushing towards gender equality and seen as being more aspirational; and the faith girls, who prioritised religion and their parents' values, but adapted to fit in with other subcultural groups. Shane observed conflict between the gang girls and their culture of resistance and the rebel girls, who were seen as sellouts by the gang girls. Gang girls reacted to racist abuse by reaffirming their Asian identities, wearing Asian clothing. They fought back against perceived discrimination from teachers, and this led to them being isolated from higher sets and ultimately underachieving. Archer found similar resistance within Muslim boys, predominantly of Pakistani and Bangladeshi heritage. She found that the boys in her research had shaped an identity for themselves as being Muslim, and despite being born in the UK, preferred to identify as Muslim rather than British, British Asian or Asian. However, they did look to other cultures as part of their identity formation, particularly Black Caribbean and African American culture, seeing themselves as fitting closer to those cultures than any other. As a consequence, they displayed hyper-masculine characteristics, often associated in other research with Black machismo. The boys displayed attitudes that looked to reinforce patriarchal control over women, suggesting that Muslim girls needed to be controlled and that female teachers unfairly favoured girls over boys. However, the boys perceived themselves as future breadwinners and understood the importance of education. They expressed frustration at the lack of opportunities which would enable them to perform the traditional functions of a breadwinner in Asian society, and that they believed that this was in part due to structural racism in society that was designed to disadvantage them. But this research is important at looking at the formation of subcultures and how identity of minority ethnic groups, something which we'll discuss in other videos on the formation of minority ethnic identities in education, can be shaped by other cultures. Tony Sewell examined the role of black masculinities in schools and found that black boys reacted in a range of ways to the experience of education. He used similar adaptations as Merton's strain theory. Sewell suggested that black boys could be categorised as falling into one of 4 groups. Firstly, there were the conformists, those that played by the rules of the education system and generally saw education as a pathway to future success. Sewell argued that this was the largest group in his research. Second group were the innovators, who adopted a low-key anti-school subculture. They knew education was important, but they also believed that school was discriminating against them. However, this was rarely acted upon unless provoked into action by other groups such as the rebels. The third group are the retreatists. They were self-marginalised and they were less likely to engage with other groups. And the final group were the rebels. They were anti-school and they demonstrated a culture of resistance against what they perceived to be a racist society. The rebels were perceived as troublemakers by the school, and they reacted aggressively to that discrimination, challenging teachers' decisions and displaying threatening behaviours. Sewell argues that it is this group that underachieves most, usually as a result of exclusion. Evaluating the different research into ethnic subcultures is key to getting a good grade. Now, Tony Sewell's research has often been criticised for victim blaming and failing to acknowledge the structural racism that exists, which influences young black males and why they form anti-school subcultures. Other theorists would suggest that the concept of black boys being anti-education only occurs as a result of years of facing discrimination in the education system, whereas Sewell appears to blame the boys for reacting to those behaviours. It can be argued that anti-school subcultures tend to form in the teenage years as rejection and differential treatment from earlier schooling will influence the formation of their identities, particularly in minority ethnic students. For some that are victims of racism in their primary schooling, it may only be possible to show the impacts of racism at a later date once they've hit maturity. Furthermore, much of the research suggests that minority ethnic subcultures adopt anti-school but pro-education subcultures. In Archer's research, the Muslim boys understood the need for success. Similarly, in Shane's research, and of course the classic example of anti-school but pro-education subculture that comes from Mary Fuller's research into black girls rejecting negative labels. This demonstrates that the school, not education, is the source of frustrations. And finally, each of these pieces of research offers an insight into the school's role in identity formation of some minority ethnic groups. Further research by Archer and Francis into identity formation demonstrates the impact of school on minority ethnic identities. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on relationships and processes within schools, focusing on ethnicity and subcultures. Thanks for watching.